Well, hello! Mwah, 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 mwah. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for coming back to the Magical Mystery School. And today we're going to talk about I almost forgot to put my gloves on, lesson 21. Goodness. So anyway, and if you're just finding us for the first time, please just go to the playlist for my channel on the icon down below. I think it's over here. And and or at the end of the video, there'll be a rectangle which says Astrology Beginners. And I think I have figured out how to put the playlist in the description. So we shall see if that works out the way I'm hoping it will. Anyway, okay, so I had told you in the last class that I was going to start in on transits this time, but I tell you what, I kind of slept on it and I realized I had given you the mechanics and the geometry for the names of the aspects, but I hadn't really gone over any interpretations. So in this class, we're going to call this class, whatever, rules of thumb. Okay, so let's see, let me look. Yes, so first thing I want to just mention is just to make you sound smart so that you sound like a real astrologer type person. Just remember that when we talk about aspects, and this will be true for transits also, we always talk in terms of the faster moving planet aspecting the slower moving planet. So the moon would be aspecting everything, squares, trines, oppositions, whatever. And Pluto would always be aspected by every planet. So for example, Venus would square Saturn, but Saturn would square Neptune, okay? Because it's faster than Neptune and Venus is faster than Saturn. Okay. The other thing I want to mention is, and I need to make a correction. This thing, I rewrote this thing for you. And I'll hold it up here for a screenshot. There we go. Oops. Okay. So here's all the aspects and the symbol for them, as well as the number of degrees. Now I made a boo-boo. This one down here, the quintile, I said you make the quintile by dividing the wheel, the 360 degrees, up into 7 increments. Well, it's actually 5, quin 5. It's 72 degrees though for each aspect. And remember, these are the secondary aspects down here. So at this point in the game, as far as I'm concerned, you don't even really have to worry about them. Think about these up here at the top. Those are the most important ones. But I also put in the second name, like quincunx is also called inconjunct. Here, I'll go like this. Quincunx is also called an inconjunct. And I know that, especially at first when I was studying astrology, that really messed me up. And there's also the sesqui-square. Remember the 135 degree, which just that word sort of blows my brain into pieces. But it's also can be called a sesquiquadrate. So there's that square quad relationship. So just to let you know, I added those two things and wanted to make that correction. Okay, so as we've always talked about, when we're looking at our astrology chart, we look at the moon, the sun, and the rising sign, also called the ascendant. And I do want to repeat those things for people because, especially at first, it can be very, very confusing. And I also mentioned, I would throw Saturn in there too, just because Saturn is kind of where we get our most boo-boos in life. You know, it can kind of be our biggest, one of our stumbling blocks or hold us back, that kind of thing. So sun, moon, rising sign, and Saturn. Okay, the next thing I want to mention to you is when you're looking at, especially with aspects now, is starting to look for themes in the wheel. and your own wheel or somebody else's. And what do I mean by that? Well, let's say you're looking at the aspects, and I'm looking around for my grid. Oh, here it is. And we're going to talk about this even more in the next class. But here's this grid thing, and I want to explain this to you because this can be super helpful. But as you're looking at that, or just looking at your wheel, you might start noticing, gosh, Mars, Moon conjuncts Mars, and Mars squares Jupiter, and Mars trions Neptune, and boy, Mars is certainly a very active planet in my chart, and that's exactly true. So if you start seeing one planet or two planets just being aspected, like 3, 4, 5, I've got one planet, Jupiter, in my chart that's like aspected like 7 times, which is really pretty cool. So we'll take that one. So look for your most aspected planet. And another kind of way you can see these sort of themes or repetition is, say, for example, let's say you had Sun in Gemini. And then that Sun in Gemini was also conjunct Pluto. Well, now that I think about it, you'd probably be dead because Pluto hasn't been in Gemini for like 100 years, but are making some aspect to Pluto. So if you're a Sun in Gemini, we think of that as being a very social, bubbly type sign, talkative and that kind of thing. But if it's an aspect to Pluto, especially if it was conjunct, that's going to put a real damper on that bubbliness of Gemini. Now, let's take that Sun in Gemini and put it in the 8th house. So the 8th house is ruled by Scorpio, and Pluto rules Scorpio. So let's just say it was a Sun conjunct Pluto, and then in the 8th house, now we're seeing even more Scorpio-Pluto type energy on that poor little Gemini Sun. So it's going to kind of be dampen down that bubbliness of Gemini. So that's what I mean by seeing a pattern. We saw it conjunct a planet. We saw it in the house that planet rules. Let me do another example. Let's say you had Venus and Saturn in some sort of aspects. Could be square, opposition, anything like that. But let's say that Venus is also in Capricorn. Okay, Saturn rules Capricorn. Or that Venus is in the 10th house. Okay, so there we're seeing, okay, not only is it aspecting Saturn, but it's also in a house that Saturn rules or something like that. So there you kind of see that Venus is going to be, Venus is kind of our love, but it's also our money sign. And with it being maybe in Capricorn or in the 10th house, even though it might be in opposition to Saturn that we think would kind of be a damper on that Venus, well, it's going to make this person a pretty good career person, that's for sure, and be able to make a good salary and stuff too, I would think. So anyway, so that's what I mean about looking for themes. And at this point, you may also be going, oh, I need an astrologer. Yes, you do. Even to this day, I go get my astrology chart read every year. My astrologer, it's like going to the doctor, because there's always things you're not going to see in your chart or aren't going to register. It's like, oh, wow, this could be really super important. So, okay, so I'm going to put you on pause for a second and bring the camera down because I do want to show you some of these things on the wheel. I think it'll make it more meaningful. Okay, so here we are with our chart. And first, so some other expressions you're going to hear when is who's the ruler of your chart? Well, the rising sign. So, and I just put an example here. I want to do something different than Aries, which is our usual generic rising sign. But let's just say you're a Virgo rising. Well, Mercury rules Virgo, so that means the ruler of your chart is going to be Mercury. So that you might start to look at that where it is in your chart, the aspects to it, that kind of thing, because that can be a little bit more of an important planet also. Another one that you'll hear is, what's your most elevated planet? Well, what that means is any planet that's up here near the midheaven, okay, can be any planet. And if you've got all your planets down here, it might even be down in here. It's just whatever planet is the closest to that midheaven. Okay, so that's your most elevated planet. And you may have figured this out, but say you do have Sun in Aries, okay. Oops, there's our clock. Okay. But let's say that Sun is in the 8th house. So even though you're always going to be a Sun in Aries, we call that, remember the 8th house is ruled by Scorpio, so you would be an honorary Scorpio. So that's another expression you'll hear. Okay, and then last but not least, let's say you've got the Sun in Cancer here, whoops, in the 11th house. Got to get some new stickies there. And so remember, squares are always the same, cardinal, fixed, or mutable. So let's say you've got the Moon in Aries squaring the Sun in Cancer. And remember, squares are always 90 degrees in our chart here. So, oops, this guy. So remember how squares are always 90 degrees. So this, because that Moon is moving towards, though, remember the Moon is the faster one, is moving towards the Sun, that's going to be called an applying square. So you're going to hear that expression also. And if the Moon's down here, though, say in Libra, so two cardinal signs 90 degrees away from each other, but that Moon is moving away from the Sun, that's called a separating square. So you're going to hear that applying and separating also for transits. But I just wanted to kind of, again, we're getting up there, but with meanings of things. But just to let you know, you're going to hear that applying square and separating square. So anyway, I think that's enough for this class. I want to go over these grid things in the next class, and start talking about just the planets and how you interpret and integrate the art of interpretation. Okay, so thank you guys. Just remember, from there to here, from here to there, funny things are everywhere. Boom. All right.